Hello again. I first just wanted to say thank you guys for commenting on the last video. That was exactly what I was looking for and the reason why I created the video in the first place, because I saw a lot of people asking questions and commenting on other videos related to Wi-Fi HaLow, but weren't really getting answers. And so I wanted to kind of create that space for us to all work together collectively on this open source project, a project that where all the information you need is out there. It's just a matter of interpreting it and understanding what it was that you were reading. And so in the comment section already, just on my first video, with the first, it's like 20 something comments, I think, or something like that. I feel like we were able to get more information out than I've seen in the past, which makes me really happy. That's all I wanted to do. I just wanted to get the information out there and just kind of just have those discussions, and then also kind of explain what it is that I'm doing and what my plan is with this project. So again, thank you everyone for those comments, and anything else that you want to see different, just let me know. Constructive criticism is very much welcome. These are my first videos, so again, still trying to figure this out, how I want to do this, the kind of format, things like that. So again, thank you so much. So since that last video, I wanted to explain where I've been, what it is that I've been working on, and where I currently am at on those projects. So there's two main things that I'm currently working on. One is shrinking down the PCB for Open MaNet. We are currently using this here, right? We're using a Raspberry Pi with a Wi-Fi HaLow hat or adapter, basically, with a USB-A Wi-Fi module and an SD card on the back. A lot of these components we're not using that's on this board. So I've been working on shrinking this down, as well as creating some kind of smaller housing based on the PCB that I'm currently working on. So I'll go through each of these here in a minute. But first I wanted to just discuss what it was that we're actually using for each of these and what I've tried and tested. We'll then go back to the computer and I'll show you what it is that I'm working on and how I'm doing it. So if you remember from the last video, this is kind of the full stack of components that we're using to have this up and running and working. One being the hat that plugs into the top of the Raspberry Pi. Let me go ahead and grab a individual Raspberry Pi. So you have a hat that plugs into this Raspberry Pi that converts this I/O into a mini PCIe slot for this Wi-Fi HaLow module. My first thought was, when I first saw this, was why do we even need this? We should be able to just take the I/O directly from this and have the Wi-Fi HaLow plug into the same board, basically. So we should be able to get rid of this to adapt this guy directly. And then the other thing that I wanted to get rid of was the USB Wi-Fi, and instead use something like this M.2 Wi-Fi card to make it a more like integrated solution. The other nice thing about this M.2 card, someone even asked in the comments, was they were looking for other options for this adapter, because this has SMA connectors for using your own antennas, which again is another thing that I wanted to also find. And so looking on Open MaNet's website, under hardware, he had a section that explained that he has the CM4 module working with a couple carrier boards. And so what I did was I ordered a CM4 module, and we'll go over exactly what that is here later. But basically, a CM4 module is this guy. What it is the Raspberry Pi shrunken down into something about this size. But what it is it's missing all the I/O, all the things that you use for connecting things to this. None of that is broken out on this board. So basically, this is just the Raspberry Pi CPU, and all of the other I/O components, like the controllers for all the I/O, are all on this board, but there is no way to actually plug into this board. The way that you plug into it is some very small headers on the back that you can then use your own carrier board, kind of like how a motherboard works, a CPU works in a motherboard on a computer. So using this, we're able to kind of eliminate a lot of this. So since our last video, I've pretty much thrown these guys out the door and have just been working with this directly. Now, what's nice again on his website is he has a couple carrier boards. So you can kind of look at these carrier boards as like the motherboard that holds this guy and then breaks everything out into IO for you. And in the couple examples that he has, you'll see that there is one, it's on one that's called like dual Ethernet carrier board or something like that. And he's using one of these Wi-Fi modules through M.2. I thought, wow, that's great, because if I can just get a carrier board that's smaller than the one that he's using but has M.2, I can throw in a Wi-Fi M.2 card and start that process of eliminating the USB Wi-Fi adapter. And so what I did is I went online and went to the same place and got another carrier board, and it's about the same size as a Raspberry Pi, but it just has an M.2 slot on the back. This is where I started to run into problems. And that problem is this is an M.2 slot, but I never really thought about it until now. But M.2 cards all have different versions. So there's what's called keys. So there's like an M.2 A key, E key, M key, and so on. And each of them kind of serve their own purpose. Now, I believe there are adapters out there, but generally what it is M.2 M key is used for storage devices, so like SSDs, things like that. M.2 A and E are typically used for something like Wi-Fi modules. This smaller board that I picked ended up having an M.2 M key, so this card does not plug into or work with this carrier board. So at the end of the day, I ended up with just another version of this using a CM4 module. So then I went back to Open MaNet's website and saw that, oh, the version of the board that he's using, the dual Ethernet carrier board, which is a much larger version of this board, has that AE key M.2 slot and not the M key that's on this board. And so that kind of set me back, and I was like, man, now I don't have any way of plugging in this Wi-Fi card. So from there, I was like, I know that I don't need this guy. I want to eliminate this guy, and no board out there has, no carrier board out there has the M.2 slot that I want. So instead of trying to piece this together and figure all this out, I figured let's go ahead and start diving into creating our own board. So I wanted to go ahead and start creating my own board to fit my needs specifically. And what I was able to come up with was a PCB that's about this size. What I did here is I took the volume of the PCB and just basically 3D printed something that size so I can just visually see like, okay, this is how much I've shrunk that down. What I mean by that is I have a PCB, the layout kind of looks like is a CM4 module sitting here, the Wi-Fi module sitting here, and the Wi-Fi HaLow module sitting here. What I have here is a PCB that takes up about this much space, right? And so knowing that this is now my volume, and just to put this in perspective, this is a little bit smaller than a iPhone mini. So now that I've shrunk something down this much, then I was like, okay, well, let's go ahead and start figuring out a way to make a case for this. How can we build a case? So instead of having something like this and then having to build a case around this, I now have the capability to create any shape and size PCB that I want. With this being mostly the smallest, I have ideas how to shrink this even more later, but for this first variant, this is as small as I want to go because I do need to test this. I haven't worked with some of the components that I'm using on this, so there's a possibility I have this PCB made and it may not work. I don't know, we'll find out. But But now, knowing that I have a PCB this size, I was like, okay, well, now we can start creating a case for this, right? And so the first thing I did was like, okay, well, what does that look like? So first I created a frame. This is all off my 3D printer. I printed a frame, just this kind of, I basically just started blocking all this out. So just, this isn't exactly what it's going to look like in the end. This is just me trying to figure out the size and the dimensions of the components that are needed. So first I took something, printed the piece, basically printed something that's the size of the PCB and made a frame for it. So then I was like, okay, so this is about the frame that's needed for the PCB. The next thing I needed to figure out was how much volume were we going to take up with just the batteries. There's a lot of discussion online for devices like this for battery. I have my own personal reasons for specific batteries that I want to use. And for now, I'm just going to go down the path that I think that works best for me, and especially for this early testing phases. And my idea was to just go straight with 18650 batteries. I use them in most of my projects. I have a bunch of them laying around. So my next thing was, okay, how many 18650 batteries can we fit in something roughly this size, right? But we can kind of pull some of this back. We have space in the back. So with that, I went ahead and blocked out another thing and was like, okay, let's see how many batteries can we fit? Can we get about 3 of these? So I wanted to go ahead and create something that can fit about 3 18650 batteries. My idea with this was if I can create some kind of like a battery cartridge type thing that's serviceable, but also keeps the batteries together, kind of like how like batteries for like DJI drones work, right? Like the battery itself is inside one package, but what I wanted to do was create something where you can just use your own 18650 batteries. So something that'll end up enclosing these batteries, but also allows you to remove them and replace them as needed if you want, whichever. So with that, I was able to say like, okay, well, we know we're gonna take up about this much space for 3 18650 batteries. And so now we know with this is about how much space those take up. With this on the back, we still have all the space up here at the top. So I went ahead and blocked out another object here just to kind of see what this would look like with some kind of 18650 battery cartridge that kind of plugs into the back. So you can kind of see here the overall dimensions of something just kind of blocked out for the PCB that I've been working on. Now, the nice thing about this is, since I'm making my own PCB, I can adjust any of the scales, the size of anything that I need to. And we also have plenty of space back here. If we wanted to end up turning this and having more batteries go up horizontally, we can also add other modules in here later. Say we want to add the capability to have a mesh-tastic radio or some kind of push-to-talk radio over Wi-Fi. Anything like that, we have plenty of space to add other PCBs if we want to create something later, which is kind of what I'm just kind of envisioning and planning ahead. So yeah, this is kind of what I've been working on, is just the idea of this. Now, the reason I have a T-deck out. This currently has mesh-tastic on it. Some of y'all have probably seen this. I just wanted to kind of have this out, just kind of show and compare the size of the two next to each other. Because if some of you have this, you kind of know, this gives you an idea on how much I have actually shrunk this down. The other thing that I'm considering and thinking about is on this battery pack, I want to have the ability to charge this pack as a whole using USB-C. And then I'm thinking about also having all the power board, basically the converter to go to the 5 volts for the Raspberry Pi, having it built into this, as well as a battery monitor built into this, because I think one of the best things is on the DJI batteries, when when you have these batteries by themselves, you can still press a button and see on the LEDs how much battery is left in this pack, right? So I'm really wanting to kind of recreate something like this for now. Maybe later down the road, we'll do something different, but for now, this is kind of my goal for the battery pack, but while keeping it as small as I can, right? So really, the first thing that I'm trying to do is shrink that board down, get the PCB that I need for my use case, and then work on the battery pack for it. And then after that, we can probably do something like ATAC, go over that. But anyways, that's what I've been up to and kind of rundown of all the things that I've been doing. Oh, the other thing that I want on this, that I'm thinking ahead, is the ability to still use an external 5-volt source. So like say you have one of these cell phone chargers or something like that, a battery bank, right? I think an idea that I have is where this battery pack plugs in to also have a port or something like that where you can connect, and maybe even like a connector that has like a screw or something that locks in, but a battery pack connector, an external battery pack connector, basically a 5-volt connector. Maybe even still use like USB-C or something like that. But anyways, that's the other thing I'm kind of just throwing out there, kind of thinking about as I'm making this. So with all that, I'm trying to keep this video a little bit shorter than the last one by a little bit, a lot. I'm really trying to keep this one much shorter, but that's what I've been up to. I'm going to go ahead and take you over to the computer now, and we're going to go over how I've been shrinking this down and kind of my thought process and how that looks. And then, yeah, I think that's really it. Thanks again for everything, and let's go over to the computer. Okay, over here, I want to go ahead and show how I went about creating my own PCB at a very high level. I'm not going to go into too much detail. We would be here all night. But what I want to do is just kind of show what that process looks like, and maybe it would help you understand what it is that I'm doing here. So let's go ahead and start with the Raspberry Pi that we were all working with and kind of explain what all the components are on it, and then we'll go from there and compare it to the CM4. First, we have our SD card slot. This we know we're going to need for loading the firmware onto the Raspberry Pi. Now, there is a case where we don't need this, but I am planning on keeping this for now because just in case people don't want to use the other way of doing this. This right here is going to be the display port. This we know that we're not going to be using, so we're going to go ahead and eliminate this guy. This down here is the power port. I do want to keep a USB power port in case you need to use some kind of backup battery pack, things like that. But I do plan to add another auxiliary, I guess you can say, power port, right? Plus this, right? So we're going to keep something like this, and then also have some other way of powering, like making our own battery pack. Right here, I had HDMI 0 and HDMI 1. I did not want these. I don't care about these. Same thing for this port right here. This is a camera port. As of right now, Open MaNet doesn't use this camera. It would be cool down the road if somehow we could have a live camera feed straight through the OpenWRT software, but for now, this isn't used. So in my current version of my board, I also don't care about this, and I'm getting rid of that. This right here is the headphone audio jack. Again, Open MaNet does not currently use this, so we know that we can also get rid of this guy. Over here, we have a couple USB 2.0 ports, as well as a couple USB 3.0 ports. Now, I know that I will be using some of these ports for certain things down the road, just because I have been working on this, so I know ahead of time. But we don't want these massive USB Type A ports. Instead, the only thing that we really need USB for is the Wi-Fi, but we plan on using that M.2 Wi-Fi card, right? So in a way, we will need USB, but I'll explain that here in a little bit on what that actually looks like. The next thing up here is your Ethernet jack, right? So this is going to be important. We still need this for when we're setting up the Raspberry Pi. But after that, we really don't need to use this unless we're wanting to use a gate. In my case, I'm not wanting to use a gate. I'm just working with a LAN. I don't really need this massive Ethernet jack. Knowing that I still need it though for the programming process, what I plan to do is actually break this out into a smaller little header that we can plug in a custom cable to use for the programming and setup process, and then being able to unplug that when we're not using it. And then that would save the space where this jack is, right? Over here, this is a PoE header. We're not using PoE, so it's not important to us. The next thing is this big I/O header. Now, the Raspberry Pi has a lot of GPIO pins, general purpose I/O pins. We know that our Wi-Fi HaLow module uses at least some of these, and with the schematics available online, I was able to figure out what pins are actually being used. So we're going to eliminate most of these, and then really what's going to end up happening is we're not even going to have a massive header like this. We're going to just directly wire the Raspberry Pi to that Wi-Fi HaLow module. So now that we've gone through all of this, you can see how much of it we can eliminate since we don't actually use most of the I/O that's on this board. So let's go ahead and move on to the next part, which is comparing this to the CM4 and where the CM4 kind of fits in here. The way you can kind of look at this is the Raspberry Pi 4 is your computer's motherboard with the back I/O panel, right? So on the back of your computer, you have all your USB ports and everything like that. The Raspberry Pi 4 is all of that combined into one board. Instead, with the CM4 is just the needed components for all of the I/O on the Raspberry Pi, and then you can break out that I/O however you want. So it's almost like this is just the processor, and then down here is the processor with the I/O attached to it, right? So on the CM4, on the bottom, has these little headers. These little headers are all of these components around this edge broken out amongst these pins, right? So now what we can do is we can take the CM4 and just use the pins that we actually care about and reattach the parts of on this that we actually want. So for example, the SD card slot, a variation of the USB, a variation of the Ethernet port. So this is kind of like the approach that I took whenever it came to setting this up. I kind of broke down what it was that I cared about and was like, okay, now with the CM4, we can make this much smaller. We can condense this. One more important thing to point out about the CM4. Earlier I mentioned that I planned to keep the SD card for people that wanted to use the SD card. The reason I pointed that out was because the CM4 here has one more extra chip, and what this is like onboard memory for it. So instead of using the SD card, it may be possible to actually just use this to store the actual program instead of having an SD card. Now, the cool thing about CM4 is if you don't want to spend the extra money to have this integrated, you can actually buy a variant that doesn't have this. Same thing with this built-in Wi-Fi right here. Since we know that the Wi-Fi module that's built into the Raspberry Pi isn't used because the Wi-Fi HaLow chip takes up the I/O, takes up the same I/O basically. So we know that we can also potentially buy a variant of the CM4 that doesn't have Wi-Fi. We could save more money there. So with the CM4, you can kind of get your own version that actually makes most sense to you, and then from there, then you can make a more custom board in a way, right? So with that, now if we go on to Open MaNet's website, he has already done some of the work here, because what he did is he found a carrier board and a CM4 that works, that also uses what is most important to me. What I wanted to find was this Wi-Fi M.2 slot. So now instead of having to use a USB port for a USB-A port for M.2, I'm very careful with what I'm saying there. I'll explain here in a minute. But basically, so we don't have to use a USB-A port, which are one of these USB ports over here. We can actually use this port right here for our Wi-Fi, right? And then up here is where your CM4 module plugs in. Here's your other header on your CM4 on the bottom there. And then on top of this is where your Wi-Fi HaLow module plugs in through the same I/O header that's on the regular Raspberry Pi. Now this is where it gets really cool, because now that we know that this works based on his website, Waveshare, the company down here that makes this carrier board for the CM4, has all the schematics available online for this board. So now we know we can take this board that is currently working, take all the components that we actually care about, and reduce this down based on the schematic that they have online. And just to give an idea of what that looks like, I have it up over here. And so this is actually the schematic available online for that carrier board. Using this schematic, I was able to then eliminate the components that I'm not using and reduce it down to just those few components that we actually care about. Now, the one thing that I found interesting, and the reason why I wanted to be very careful about the whole USB thing, is I learned something through this, and it seems like the M.2 port, which is really interesting, actually uses USB. So what it's doing here is it's using the USB pins, and it's also using PCIe pins off of the I/O on the Raspberry Pi. So I believe what's actually happening here is most of these pins up here, these PCIe pins, are not even used. I'm thinking that the reason why this works is because all it's doing is just using USB to run that Wi-Fi, that M.2 Wi-Fi module, which makes complete sense. If that's the case, then this is super easy to work with. In my schematic, in my board that I'm designing right now, I'm copying this one-to-one just in case, but I believe at the end of the day, all it's doing is just using that module as though it's USB. So when I say we're eliminating USB, I'm very careful with saying that, because in a way we're not. It's just going to be integrated into the board with this right here, right? So really all this is doing is connecting back to the CM4 here using USB, right? So it's like an integrated USB. Now, there are, like I said, there are PCIe pins that are also broken out. PCIe pins, by that I mean it's other GPIO pins that are used for PCIe pins, right? Actually, I may be lying about that. Scratch everything I just said. Let me actually just double check that. So actually I lied. So there are dedicated, so what you're looking at here, I'm going to show this again here in a minute, but what you're looking at here is actually the headers on the bottom of the CM4 inside of my schematic that I've been working on, that I'm designing. So it actually does look like there are dedicated PCIe pins, which is interesting. Again, I'm pretty sure this isn't used, but I'm going to be tying it into the M.2 header. You can actually already see over here where I already have that set up. So down here, this is the header for the M.2. You can see I have the USB here and the PCIe here. So at the end of the day, it will still have those PCIe pins, but it also is just using USB. I'm almost positive. So anyways, so that's what that looks like. Let's go ahead and go back to this guy. So with that, that's how I was able to reduce it down to that size that I showed you back there. Is I basically just eliminated all these big plugs that we're not using. So I have one more slide to show here, and this was exactly what I was kind of showing you a second ago. So what you're looking at here, these guys are just these guys here, right? It's probably not one for this one, may actually be this, it doesn't matter. But long story short, what you're looking at here is all the I/O. So you can see that GPIO, the big header pin that's back here, that's here, this guy, is actually all of these guys right here, right? And then what's happening is we know that this GPIO is used for this guy here, right? The Wi-Fi HaLow module. Then we also know that the PCIe is used for this guy, right? And then we know that USB is also used for this guy. I'm not going to go over it too much detail, but USB is a little interesting on the Raspberry Pi because you technically only have one USB port. USB is used for programming and it's used for this module. You'll notice that there are multiple USB ports on those boards. How they do that is through something called a MUX, and then they also have basically a USB hub chip. I do have those in my schematic, and that's how I'm going to also be hooking up everything. But long story short, that's how USB kind of works. There is only one set of USB on this whole board. The next thing is, you may be wondering, is how do I know what GPIO pins are used for this? Well, the nice thing is Seeed Studio also has schematics for most of the things that they sell. So with that, I was able to find the schematic for the hat. So that board that adapts that IO header to the Wi-Fi module PCIe mini slot, the schematic is available online. So I was able to trace back exactly what pins are being used for the Wi-Fi HaLow module. The interesting thing about the hat is it seems like it's not used just for the Wi-Fi HaLow module, but there's other modules that it's used for. So there are some extra pins that are broken out here. But I am, again, going to go ahead and carry over all the pins that are in this schematic and just tie them up exactly how it's tied through the IO header, right? One interesting thing about the hat that I didn't mention, other people have probably noticed, is that it actually has a GPS module built in. Open MaNet does use it for some of the range testing that he does, but other than that, it's not used for anything else as of right now. So that's another component that I'm able to just remove and get rid of since we aren't using it for anything else as of right now. It can always be added later. GPS basically just uses serial data, so any kind of I/O with transmit receive serial data, you can just hook it up. It's super easy. So since it's not being used right now, I'm just leaving it off. It's just a component that's just using up power. If we want to later, we can go ahead and re-add it. I guess I can go ahead and explain a little bit of this over here. We do have our Ethernet I/O here, and we also have our SD card I/O here, which I will also be using, and I think that covers it. So that just kind of gives you an idea on how I'm going about creating this smaller PCB. Basically, you can see here how on the bottom it has that camera 1, camera 0, camera 1, DSIO. Display IO. We have more display IO here. Here's your HDMI output, more HDMI output, and then obviously we have our PCIe that we care about, some of our GPIO that we care about, some of our SD IO that we care about for SD card, and our Ethernet IO. So this shows you the approach that I took when it came to creating our own module, basically. So what this does is this eliminates the use of the hat, so we no longer need the hat, right? Because we're just going to connect this directly to the card, right? This here, before we had USB-A, right? To connect this, but we no longer need that. We're basically going to connect this directly through M.2. So this will be just an M.2 header. This down here is just a PCIe mini, I think it's called, header. And so we no longer have to stack things. We don't have to have a USB port or Wi-Fi USB sticking out. This up here allows us to have our own custom antennas, things like that. So this is how I've been doing this. So anyways, I think that covers everything. I hope you guys liked this and followed along. If y'all have any other questions or ideas, please continue throwing out ideas in the comments below. If you liked this, make sure you like, subscribe, share with anyone. It helps me kind of understand, see what you guys are wanting, see what you're looking for. Anyways, thanks again, and I hope y'all have a good one.